Chapter 1. The Youngsters Behind YouTube, Steve Chen and Chad Hurley, by Evan Carmichael.
Everybody aspires to be a star, says Steve Chen, a Taiwanese immigrant who came to the United States with his family in hopes of a better life. Chen's aspirations became a reality when he, along with Pennsylvania-born Chad Hurley, created what is today the world's largest online video website. YouTube has now become a global sensation, propelling both Hurley and Chen to the top of Business 2.0's list of the 50 people who matter now. YouTube was also named Time Magazine's 2006 Invention of the Year. When Hurley and Chen decided to sell their company, they did so for a hefty price tag of $1.65 billion. Steve Shu Chen was born in August 1978 in Taiwan, where he lived until he was 8 years old. His family then emigrated to the U.S., where Chen attended John Hersey High School and later the Illinois Math and Science Academy. After graduating from high school, Chen enrolled in the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign to pursue a degree in computer science. But it would be a part-time job he was hired for at a small e-commerce startup called PayPal that would change his life forever. Chad Meredith Hurley was born in 1977 as the middle child of parents Donald and Joanne Hurley. His father was a financial consultant, while his mother worked as a local school teacher. Chad, along with his older sister and younger brother, grew up near Birdsboro, Pennsylvania. After graduating from Twin Valley High School in 1995, where his mother continues to teach in the gifted program, Hurley enrolled in the Indiana University of Pennsylvania to pursue a bachelor's degree in fine art. Before graduating from the university, Hurley also applied for a job at PayPal. He was flown to California and, as part of his job interview, was asked to design a logo for the young company that would demonstrate his artistic abilities. Hurley got the job, and the logo he designed remains PayPal's official logo to this day. It was while working at PayPal that Hurley and Chen became fast friends. They began to spend their free time discussing several different business ideas. When eBay purchased PayPal for $1.54 billion, the two received large bonuses for their role in growing the small startup. They decided to use their money to create their own venture. With Chen's engineering skills and Hurley's creativity, they thought forming a company together was a plausible idea. In January 2005, Hurley and Chen attended a friend's dinner party in San Francisco. They had taken a few digital videos of the event and wanted to share them with each other the next day, but could not find a good means to do so. The files were too big to email, and posting them online would take hours. With that, Hurley and Chen had their first idea for a sustainable business. Using the money they had received from the PayPal buyout, Chen and Hurley decided to create YouTube, to make uploading and sharing videos online as easy as anyone could want. It was the birth of a revolution. "We're not in a hurry," Hurley once said. "We're interested in building our community. We're trying to improve discovery. We're trying to improve the experience for people on our site." They might not have been in a hurry, but their site sure grew in one. Today, YouTube has almost half of the online video market, and it is still growing. How did a university dropout and a boy who loved to draw become the industry leaders they are considered now? User-oriented. Hurley and Chen knew from personal experience how difficult it was to upload and share videos online. And that was why they decided to create YouTube. They wanted to create a website that others like themselves would find useful. By prioritizing its users' needs and being as easy and interactive as possible, YouTube was able to find a loyal audience that numbers in the millions. Unique. When you visit YouTube.com, you are most likely searching for something that you cannot find anywhere else. From long-lost 80s music videos to political speeches to the current events of today, you are almost guaranteed to find it on YouTube. And that is why people keep coming back for more. Viral. Both YouTube's marketing strategy and growth as a result have been viral in nature. From holding promotions such as the iPod Nano Daily Giveaway to having an external video player that can be placed on any website and can link back to their own, Hurley and Chen created a platform that continues to grow at an exponential rate. Well-timed. Some have suggested that YouTube's success was due to a perfect storm of environmental factors. More to the point, it was Hurley and Chen's ability to not only notice but also take advantage of that storm that pushed them to the top. From the lessening of the cost of bandwidth and digital cameras to the growth of online social networks, Hurley and Chen created a company that was right for the times. Focused. Hurley and Chen were never out to create a money-making machine. They wanted to create a sustainable business, but also one that meant something to its users. And so, instead of overloading its pages and videos with advertisements, Hurley and Chen are being careful and testing the waters as to which ads will work and where. They are refusing to lose sight of their number one priority, their user. YouTube put the right technology out there to meet a need, but it did so much more than that. It created a simple and unique way for people to connect with each other. It has become the fastest-growing video sharing site of all time, all the while outliving the critics' claims that it is just another teenage fad that will soon die down. With the Google buyout, the company faces a more uncertain future in terms of how it will operate and who will call the shots. One thing is for sure, however, and that is that Hurley and Chen are still here, and their business is still booming.
Chapter 2. When to Use Female Nouns by Minion Fogarty.
Today's topic is the use of feminine nouns such as actress and comedienne. These days, people often see such terms as sexist, but it's also common to hear at least some of them. So, what exactly are the modern rules for using such terms? Actually, this isn't a matter of grammar. It's about writing to minimize the potential for readers to draw conclusions you don't want to convey. Other languages have more feminine nouns. It could be worse. In some languages, most nouns have different forms for different sexes. For example, in Spanish, a male lawyer is an abogado, and a female lawyer is an abogada. Furthermore, in some languages, even verbs can have different forms, depending on the sex of their subject. In Hebrew, ra means saw for masculine subjects, while ra'ata means saw for feminine subjects. In Mandarin Chinese, a man can marry a woman, but a woman can only be married to a man. Even in English, there used to be more female-specific nouns than there are now. Centuries ago, people used now obsolete nouns such as teacheress, soldieress, and mistress. The fact that English has mostly abandoned female-specific nouns like these is probably part of the reason that the remaining ones tend to attract attention. Paired nouns are okay. Sometimes male and female-specific nouns don't suggest problematic messages. Pairs such as prince and princess, duke and duchess, abbot and abbess, are unobjectionable. In these pairs, the male-specific term never refers to both males and females. Even though it might be convenient to have a word to refer to any child of a king or queen, prince can only mean a king or queen's son. So, if the sexes are treated equally, each one having its own term, the female-specific term is probably okay. Some gender-neutral nouns, such as flight attendant, have become standard. The next easiest cases are those where a gender-neutral term has become popular. In recent decades, gender-neutral terms such as firefighter, police officer, mail carrier, and flight attendant have gained currency. Definitely use these. Problems arise when a noun exists to call out only one sex. The troublesome cases are when we have one term that can refer to either sex and another that refers only to women. Take the word author. It can refer to men or women in a sentence such as, "Our agency represents many authors." But if you use author to refer to writers of either sex and the exclusively feminine authoress to refer to female authors, you now have a way of referring specifically to female authors, but no way of referring specifically to male authors. The implication is that most authors are male, and that it's worth pointing out when one of them isn't. As the Cambridge Grammar of the English Language says, the marked term suggests some difference in status and may imply lower standards or achievement. Is there ever a good reason to write female doctor? This issue comes up even when there aren't gender-specific terms. For example, doctor can be either masculine or feminine. Sally McConnell Ginnett, a linguist at Cornell University who specializes in language and gender, advises, if you write female doctor, then ask yourself why you want to emphasize that a certain doctor is a woman. Do you write male doctor in similar contexts? Her point is that sexism in society makes it easy to send messages in our word choice that we don't intend to send. Make sure your words are relevant. The guideline suggested in Garner's Modern American Usage and the Merriam-Webster Dictionary of English Usage is to avoid using a gender-specific noun unless sex is relevant to the discussion. Usually, it isn't. Sex doesn't typically matter when you're talking about doctors or authors, for example. But what about when sex is relevant? Another case in point, actress. Male and female actors usually play different kinds of roles, so it's useful for people in show business to make this distinction. If actress saves them from having to use female actor, why not use it? Unfortunately, even if you follow this guideline of using gender-neutral noun forms in most cases, and gender-specific nouns only when sex is relevant, the problem remains. You'll end up using female-specific terms to talk specifically about women, but where's the analogous male-specific term? If there isn't one, you may still be sending a message that a woman doing some job is surprising news. And indeed, although there is sometimes a good reason to use the word actress, that hasn't stopped it from acquiring negative connotations, as we're told by a contact in the industry. In cases like these, where linguistic change is ongoing, the usage of the audience you're writing for can be a good guide. If a certain community uses actress where they are clearly not devaluing women's acting, feel free to do likewise. If they insist on actor across the board, you may want to follow suit. Summary. If there's a gender-neutral term in general use, use it. If there's not, but the masculine and feminine nouns each stay in their own territory, then use them. Be careful when one term can refer to either sex, another term refers only to women, and no term refers only to men. In these cases, avoid referring to a person's sex if possible, and, if it's not, carefully assess the usage of your audience. But remember that these rules are just shortcuts. What matters is getting across the messages you want to send and trying to block those you don't.
Chapter 3. Your Negative Attitude Can Hurt Your Career by Anthony Balderrama.
In any situation, a cafe, the subway, a movie theatre, you don't want to be that guy or gal. There is no strict definition of what it means to be that person, but usually it refers to the person who stands out for all the wrong reasons. In a cafe, it's the guy who won't stop hitting on you. In the subway, it's the woman who eats a cheeseburger and fries, filling the entire car with an onion aroma. At the movies, it's the patron who leaves her cell phone ringer on. Wherever you are, you don't want to be that person, especially at work. Of course, at work you'll find plenty of bad traits. The gossip, the chronically tardy person, the kiss-up, and everyone else you try to avoid. Perhaps the one type you want to avoid, hanging around and being, more than any other, is the negative person. The negative person hates everything. Every task is too lowly. Every meeting lasts too long. Every co-worker is too dumb. Nary a word passes through his or her lips that's not dripping with sarcasm. If you realize that you are this furrow-browed employee, the chorus of sighs and complaints, accented with eye rolls, will earn you the worst reputation of everyone. And whether or not you're aware, your boss will notice too. First impressions count. One reason interviews cause job seekers so much anxiety is the need to make a favorable first impression. Although qualifications make up the bulk of the hiring decision, employers are also looking at the kind of attitude you display to determine whether or not you'd be an asset to the organization. Lauren Milligan, host of the business radio show Living the Dream, advises job seekers to temper any negativity they have involving their previous jobs. During an interview, a common question posed to the candidate is, "What problems did you encounter in your previous job?" A negative employee will use this time to talk about their boss, co-workers, job functions, anything that didn't sit quite well with him or her, Milligan says. Don't do that. A positive employee will see this question as a chance to talk about a difficult situation and how they turned it into a good experience. The cliched business advice of bringing your boss solutions, not problems, is actually true. Negative employees think of how problems affect them, while positive employees think of how they can solve a challenge, Milligan says. Everyday behavior. Of course, maintaining an upbeat attitude for 30 minutes or an hour during an interview is far easier than fighting off grumpiness every day. You'll probably have to vent once in a while because some days will be bigger pains than others, and few people would hold that against you. Habitual negativity is a problem because it can quickly become your trademark and overshadow any accomplishments. And in a tough job market, when workers are feeling stressed and employers consider trimming headcount, you don't want to be remembered for being the local sourpuss. In this recession, people are having to do more with less. That's just a fact, Milligan says. If you're the employee that complains about clients or the workload or the commute or the manager, and you seek out opportunities to talk about your misery, this will definitely pose a problem with your employer and co-workers. Just as damaging can be your tendency to arrive late and leave early. Helen T. Cook is the marketing director of Cook Consulting Group, where she coaches and teaches clients about team development. She agrees that behavior affects others' perceptions of us. The non-verbals will always prevail if we're trying to mask negativity. For example, the employee makes a comment that sounds okay, but the facial expressions and/or body language make it clear that she or he isn't on board, Cook explains. If you are not feeling enthusiastic in general, consider what is within your control primarily, and secondarily, what is within your ability to influence. Make positive changes in those two arenas. In your quest to compensate for a lack of enthusiasm, you don't need to become the resident cheerleader either. Your boss will probably sense insincerity if she tells you to report at 7 a.m. tomorrow for a meeting and you react with a cheer of approval. Learn to say sure, without emitting a long sigh as you walk away. Remember, people do talk. Not everything you do should be dictated by other people's opinions, but when you work in a group environment, you can't ignore their influence on your career either. If every smile you flash to the boss morphs into a disgruntled rant to a co-worker, word of your attitude will get around. Some bosses might dismiss it as gossip, but others will take it to heart. According to Cook, a manager who senses that negativity is permeating the workplace will likely address the issue, which could hurt the naysayer's salary increase, bonus, or chances for promotion. Management realizes that they can maximize their productivity and therefore their bottom line by cultivating a healthy, robust organizational culture, Cook says. Negativity can poison the air in the workplace and create a downward spiral for the workers. This is exactly what is not needed during already challenging times with the current state of the marketplace and the economy. Milligan agrees with Cook and points out that most bosses hearing about a negative attitude will distinguish between petty gossip and a sincere concern about morale. No one likes a tattletale, whether it's in grade school or the workplace, Milligan explains. However, if an employee's attitude is causing enough of a problem to where it needs to be addressed, then it becomes the manager's job to properly deal with it. Sometimes managers aren't in a position to witness negativity coming from their staff, which is why the motives of the messenger must be taken into consideration. A good manager who is cued into the team will certainly not want one person's attitude affecting everyone else. Remember that not every aspect of a job will be fun and exciting. And sometimes you will want to roll your eyes when the boss isn't looking, but make it an exception, not a habit. After all, you don't want to be that person.
Chapter 4. The Colorful World of Synesthesia by Susan Guido from Science News.
The number 6 is a bright shade of pink. Listening to a cello smells like chocolate. And eating a slice of pizza creates a tickling sensation on the back of your neck. If you have experiences like this, you may be one of the special people with an unusual sensory condition called synesthesia. People with synesthesia experience a blending of their senses when they see, smell, taste, touch, or hear. Such people have specially wired brains so that when something stimulates one of the 5 senses, another sense also responds. This blending can cause people to see sound, smell colors, or taste shapes. Dozens of different sensory combinations exist. In the most common form of synesthesia, numbers, letters, or even days of the week appear in their own distinct color. If you've encountered these types of events, you're not alone. Scientists say as many as 1 in every 200 people may be a synesthete, as a person with this condition is called. The phenomenon is known to run in families and may occur more often among women than men. Many famous people have had synesthesia, including Russian writer Vladimir Nabokov and physicist Richard Feynman. One thing is certain. Most synesthetes treasure their unusual ability to take in the world with an additional sense. After all, who wouldn't want to experience the world in full, glorious color or sound? It's absolutely a positive experience, says Patricia Lynn Duffy, a synesthete who has talked to hundreds of others with the condition while writing a book on the subject. If you propose to take away someone's synesthetic ability, I think they would say, "No, I like it this way." What color is my eye? Most synesthetes learn about their amazing gift by accident. They are surprised to learn that everyone does not experience the world as they do. Though it may sound strange to many people, Duffy says the experiences are not scary. The people who have synesthesia have always experienced life that way. For as long as I could remember, each letter of the alphabet had a different and distinct color. This is just part of the way alphabet letters look to me, says Duffy. Until I was 16, I took it for granted that everyone shared those perceptions with me. Synesthetes do not actively think about their perceptions. They just happen. Some synesthetes report that they see such colors internally, in the mind's eye. Others, such as Duffy, see their visions projected in front of them, like watching an image on a movie screen. Scientists know that in synesthesia, those colors are real, not just figments of an active imagination. How? Studies show that the colors synesthetes see are highly specific and consistent over time. If the letter B is lime green, it will always be lime green. Studies done in the mid-1990s showed that synesthesia also can be measured by brain scanning techniques. For synesthetes who perceive colors when hearing words, a certain part of the brain involved with vision is active in response to sound. That type of activity didn't occur in non-synesthetes. Making connections. So how can the sound of a musical instrument lead to color? Scientists are still trying to discover exactly how information from the senses merges together in the brain, but this much is known. Messages gathered from the eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and nerves involved in the sense of touch travel to the brain for processing. Much of this sensory processing occurs in an area of the brain called the cortex, the outermost part of the brain that organizes and enables us to respond to the incoming messages. Information from each of the senses is first processed in its own special region. It's then sent on to higher regions in the cortex for further processing. At certain points in the brain, these various senses converge. One theory is that synesthesia may be caused by cross-wiring between areas of the brain that process different sensations, such as color, sound, or taste. This theory draws on the fact that children are born with many nerve connections between nearby parts of the brain. During our first few years of life, our brain makes more connections than it needs and then eventually prunes some of those away, says Edward Hubbard, a postdoctoral researcher at the French National Institute for Health and Medical Research, who studies what causes synesthesia. One thing that may happen in synesthesia, Hubbard says, is that some of these connections don't get pruned away. If so, then people may see specific colors with particular letters because they have extra connections between the brain areas involved in word and color perception. Last summer, a group of scientists in the Netherlands found direct evidence of these types of extra connections. The researchers used a method called DTI to scan the brains of 18 people with synesthesia. They also looked at the brains of 18 non-synesthetes. DTI, which stands for diffusion tensor imaging, measures how water flows in the brain. Within certain brain tissues or nerve fibers, water flows more freely in one direction than the other. This is especially true in a type of nerve fiber, or axon, that carries messages from brain cell to brain cell. Commonly called white matter, these axons connect different parts of the brain to each other. By measuring the water flow through these tissues,
The scientists could measure how many of these axons there were in each brain region. Brain regions that are highly connected will have more white matter axons. In synesthetes who saw colored letters, the scientists found higher levels of white matter in 3 different brain regions. One was in the letter and word region of the brain, known as V4. The other highly connected areas were found in brain regions involved in consciousness, the awareness that you're thinking, feeling, seeing, hearing, or doing any number of other things your brain enables you to do. We have lots of things impinging upon our senses, and some of them become conscious and some of them don't, says Hubbard. Activity in this area might make a person more consciously aware of a synesthetic experience. These findings don't rule out other possible causes of synesthesia, says Hubbard. Still, he is now working to see if this type of cross-wiring occurs in other forms of synesthesia. Other scientists are looking to see whether other parts of the brain are also involved in synesthesia. Hubbard is also developing better ways to identify the various processing regions of the brain. Everybody's brain differs a little bit in its exact organization, he says. Duffy notes that these variations in nerve connections occur not only in synesthetes, but in all people. Everybody develops a neural pattern that's kind of unique, just like a fingerprint, she says. That's why no 2 people are seeing the world in exactly the same way.
Chapter 5. What is Creative Thinking? By Roger von Eck. From A Whack on the Side of the Head. How You Can Be More Creative.
I once asked advertising legend Carl Alley what makes the creative person tick. Alley responded, "The creative person wants to be a know-it-all. He wants to know about all kinds of things. Ancient history, 19th century mathematics, current manufacturing techniques, flower arranging, and hog futures. Because he never knows when these ideas might come together to form a new idea. It may happen 6 minutes later or 6 years down the road, but he has faith that it will happen." I agree wholeheartedly. Knowledge is the stuff from which new ideas are made. Nonetheless, knowledge alone won't make a person creative. I think that we've all known people who knew lots of facts and nothing creative happened. Their knowledge just sat in their crania because they didn't think about what they knew in any new ways. The real key to being creative lies in what you do with your knowledge. Creative thinking requires an attitude that allows you to search for ideas and manipulate your knowledge and experience. With this outlook, you try various approaches. First one, then another, often not getting anywhere. You use crazy, foolish, and impractical ideas as stepping stones to practical new ideas. You break the rules occasionally and explore for ideas in unusual outside places. In short, by adopting a creative outlook, you open yourself up both to new possibilities and to change. A good example of a person who did this is Johann Gutenberg. What Gutenberg did was combine 2 previously unconnected ideas, the wine press and the coin punch. The purpose of the coin punch was to leave an image on a small area such as a gold coin. The function of the wine press was, and still is, to apply force over a large area to squeeze the juice out of grapes. One day, Gutenberg, perhaps after he'd drunk a goblet or 2 of wine, playfully asked himself, "What if I took a bunch of these coin punches and put them under the force of the wine press so that they left their image on paper?" The resulting combination was the printing press and movable type. Navy Admiral Grace Hopper had the task of explaining the meaning of a nanosecond to some non-technical computer users. A nanosecond is a billionth of a second, and it's the basic time interval of a supercomputer's internal clock. She wondered, how can I get them to understand the brevity of a nanosecond? Why not look at it as a space problem rather than a time problem? I'll just use the distance light travels in 1/100000th of a second. She pulled out a piece of string 30 centimeters long, 11.8 inches, and told her visitors, here is 1 nanosecond. In 1792, the musicians of Franz Joseph Haydn's orchestra got mad because the Duke promised them a vacation, but continually postponed it. They asked Haydn to talk to the Duke about getting some time off. Haydn thought for a bit, decided to let music do the talking, and then wrote the Farewell Symphony. The performance began with a full orchestra, but as the piece went along, it was scored to need fewer and fewer instruments. As each musician finished his part, he blew out his candle and left the stage. They did this one by one until the stage was empty. The Duke got the message and gave them a vacation. Then there's Pablo Picasso. One day he went outside his house and found an old bicycle. He looked at it for a little bit and took off the seat and the handlebars. Then he welded them together to create the head of a bull. Each of these examples illustrates the creative mind's power to transform one thing into another. By changing perspective and playing with our knowledge, we can make the ordinary extraordinary and the unusual commonplace. In this way, wine presses squeeze out information. String is transformed into nanoseconds. Labor grievances become symphonies, and bicycle seats turn into bulls' heads. The Nobel Prize-winning physician, Albert Szent-Györgyi, put it well when he said, "Discovery consists of looking at the same thing as everyone else and thinking something different." Here are 2 quick exercises to give you a chance to think something different. Exercise 1. An eccentric old king wants to give his throne to one of his 2 sons. He decides that a horse race will be run, and the son who owns the slower horse will become king. The sons, each fearing that the other will cheat by having his horse run less fast than it is capable, ask the court fool for his advice. With only 2 words, the fool tells them how to make sure that the race will be fair. What are the 2 words? Exercise 2. Can you think of a way in which you put a sheet of newspaper on the floor so that when 2 people stand face to face on it, they won't be able to touch one another? Cutting or tearing the paper is not allowed. Neither is tying up the people or preventing them from moving. Why don't we think something different more often? There are several main reasons. The first is that we don't need to be creative for most of what we do. For example, we don't need to be creative when we're driving on the freeway, or riding in an elevator, or waiting in line at a grocery store. We are creatures of habit when it comes to the business of living. Everything from doing paperwork to tying our shoes to haggling with telephone solicitors. For most of our activities, these routines are indispensable. Without them, our lives would be in chaos, and we wouldn't get much accomplished. If you got up this morning and started contemplating the bristles on your toothbrush or questioning the meaning of toast, you probably wouldn't make it to work. Staying on routine thought paths enables us to do the many things we need to do without having to think about them. Another reason we're not more creative is that we haven't been taught to be. Much of our educational system is an elaborate game of guess what the teacher is thinking. Many of us have been taught to think that the best ideas are in someone else's head. How many of your teachers asked you, what original ideas do you have? There are times, however, when you need to be creative and generate new ways to accomplish your objectives. When this happens, your own belief systems may prevent you from doing so. Here, we come to a third reason why we don't think something different more often. Most of us have certain attitudes that lock our thinking into the status quo and keep us thinking more of the same. These attitudes are necessary for most of what we do, but they can get in the way when we're trying to be creative.
Chapter 6. Listen Up by Madeline Burley Allen from Human Resource Magazine.
Imagine the following supervisor-employee exchange at your workplace.
Dave, I'm really discouraged about the way things have been going on the job. It just never goes the way I expect it to, and it seems like you're never around anymore.
Sounds as though you've been doing quite a bit of thinking about this. Go ahead.
Well, we are a week behind in production, and our supplies are not coming in on time. I feel swamped and unable to catch up. And when I have tried to find you lately to see about getting some extra help down there, you are not available.
Seems that you feel cut off from any support from me.
You have just read an example of good listening. Listening is probably the most essential component of being a successful supervisor. The one attribute most often stated about a well-liked boss is, he or she really listens to me. As Dave illustrated in the above brief scenario, he was on his way to clearing up a misunderstanding, building rapport, developing respect, and establishing a feeling of cooperation. Dave was establishing a caring and understanding environment with Bill. He did this by having the attitude about people that included the following values. I'm responsible for my actions, feelings, and behavior. I don't have the power to change others, only myself. Refraining from judging others will assist me in listening to them effectively. I allow others to be on an equal level with myself. These values influence Dave to listen empathetically, communicate openly, describe behavior non-judgmentally, and assume responsibility for his feelings and behavior. And in turn, this enhances the self-esteem of people around him. Listening is a skill. Effective listening is a learned skill. It doesn't happen automatically for most people. In addition, there are few rewards for listening, but there are punishments for not listening. How do you feel when listeners are not paying attention to you by looking at their watches, doing some activity, or not acknowledging what you've said? You probably felt put down, or even worse, you felt like you were talking to a wall. Listeners have a lot more power and impact on the talker than most people realize. In addition, many people tend to assume listening is basically the same thing as hearing. A dangerous misconception that leads to believing that effective listening is instinctive. As a result, supervisors make little effort to develop listening skills and unknowingly neglect a vital communication function. Research shows that the average person on the job spends 40% of his time listening, 35% talking, 16% reading, and 9% writing. On average, people are only about 35% efficient as listeners. This lack of effective listening often results in missed opportunities to avoid misunderstandings, conflict, poor decision-making, or a crisis because a problem wasn't identified in time. 3 levels of listening. Awareness of your listening behavior will go a long way in helping you become an effective listener. Listening can be divided into 3 levels, which are characterized by certain behaviors that affect listening efficiency. Most often, people have difficulty listening effectively when in a conflict situation, when dealing with emotional people, when having criticism directed at them, when being disciplined, or when feeling anxious, fearful, or angry. The following descriptions of the 3 levels will help you understand the distinction between how each level is expressed. Level 1. A person at Level 1 demonstrates the characteristics of a good listener. These listeners look for an area of interest in the talker's message. They view it as an opportunity to gather new and useful information. Effective listeners are aware of their personal biases, are better able to avoid making automatic judgments about the talker, and to avoid being influenced by emotionally charged words. Good listeners suspend judgment and are empathetic to the other person's feelings. They can see things from the other person's point of view and inquire about rather than advocate a position. Level 1 listeners use extra thought time to anticipate the talker's next statement, to mentally summarize the stated message, evaluate what was said, and to consciously notice nonverbal cues. Their overall focus is to listen with understanding and respect. In the example at the beginning of this article, Dave did an excellent job responding to Bill at Level 1. Read the brief scenario again with the description of Level 1 in mind, and you will see how Dave illustrates these characteristics. Level 2. At this level, a person is mainly listening to words and the content of what is being said, but does not fully understand what the words mean. This results in a semantic barrier, the meaning of words. There are thousands of words in the English vocabulary. The average adult in the United States uses 500 of these words most often. However, each one of these words has between 20 and 25 meanings. This means that we are using 500 words with the possibility of 12,500 different meanings. Adding to the confusion is the variety of slang Americans use, double meanings of many words, and on and on. The important factor in all of this is that words don't communicate. It's the meaning and the understanding of words that make communication work. For instance, Level 2 listeners are zeroing in on words, but many times they miss the intent, such as what is being expressed nonverbally through tone of voice, body posture, etc. As a result, Level 2 listeners hear what the speaker says, but make little effort to understand the speaker's intent. Needless to say, this can lead to misunderstandings and a variety of negative feelings. In addition, since the listener appears to be listening by nodding his head in agreement and not asking clarifying questions, the talker may be lulled into a false sense of being understood. Level 3. At this level, people are tuning out the speaker, daydreaming, or faking attention while thinking about unrelated matters. This causes relationship breakdowns, conflicts, and poor decision-making because the person is busy finding fault, responding defensively, or becoming overly emotional. All of this influences either the talker or the listener to move into the flight or fight mode. As you examine these 3 levels, you can imagine how different groups and individuals would work together based on which level they are activating. Benefits of Level 1 listening. There are many benefits for supervisors who listen effectively at Level 1. When employees know they are talking to a listener instead of a supervisor who sits in judgment, they openly suggest ideas and share feelings. When this happens, the two of them can work as a team, creatively solving the problem instead of placing blame on each other. As an effective listener, you set in motion a positive, mutually rewarding process by demonstrating interest in the employee and what he or she is saying. This empathetic listening encourages honesty, mutual respect, understanding, and a feeling of security in the employee. Listening also encourages employees to feel self-confident. This in turn can build their self-esteem and a feeling of being empowered. Guidelines for empathetic listening. Be attentive. You will create a positive atmosphere through your nonverbal behavior. For instance, eye contact, an open, relaxed posture, a friendly facial expression, and a pleasant tone of voice. When you are alert, attentive, and relaxed, the other person feels important and more secure. Be interested in the speaker's needs. Remember, listening at Level 1 means you listen with understanding and mutual respect. Listen from a caring attitude. Be a sounding board by allowing the speaker to bounce ideas and feelings off of you. Don't ask a lot of questions right away. Questions can often come across as if the person is being grilled. Act like a mirror. Reflect back what you think the other person is feeling. Summarize what the person said to make sure you understand what he's saying. Don't let the other person hook you. This can happen when you get personally involved. Getting personally involved in a problem usually results in anger and hurt feelings or motivates you to jump to conclusions and be judgmental. Use verbal cues. Acknowledge the person's statement using brief expressions such as, I see, or interesting. Encourage the speaker to reveal more by saying, tell me about it, let's discuss it, or I'd be interested in what you have to say. Following these guidelines will help you be a successful listener. It's critical to create the habit of being a Level 1 listener by applying these guidelines on a daily basis so that they are internalized as part of your listening behavior. You can do this by taking time each day to carry out these skills successfully in a specific situation. You will be surprised at the results.
Chapter 7. Students Won't Give Up Their French Fries by Elizabeth F. Farrell from The Chronicle of Higher Education.
On a recent summer night at the local Dairy Queen in Moorhead, Minnesota, Deborah Lee Cadwell, the director of dining services at Concordia College, felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned around to find a young man she didn't recognize holding up an ice cream cone. "He asked me if it was a red, yellow, or green," says Ms. Lee Cadwell, who realized the young man was a student at Concordia, where she has added color-coded labels to all dining hall foods to inform students of fat content. Yellow means low fat, less than 5 grams. Green indicates medium fat content, 5 to 13 grams. And red is for high-fat foods, more than 13 grams. I told him it was a red, but that was okay as long as it was in moderation, says Ms. Lee Cadwell, who is a registered dietitian. Perhaps it is an attempt to avoid gaining the dreaded freshman 15, But students around the country are demanding more information about the foods they're served in dining halls, and they're asking for a greater variety of healthy fare, according to college officials. Over the past few years, colleges have responded by hiring more dietitians and nutritionists and going to greater lengths to provide students with information about the caloric and fat content of the food they eat. But despite the wealth of information, students don't appear to be eating any healthier than their predecessors. They may be more health conscious, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're eating healthy, says Robin L. Porter, the president of H. David Porter Associates Incorporated, an independent food consulting business based in Crofton, Maryland, that works with 70 colleges. They talk the talk, but don't really walk the walk. French fries outsell apples by thousands and thousands of pounds. Some even worry that the feast of information can be harmful by feeding some students' obsession with food. Information and options. Several colleges have recently purchased software called Net Nutrition from the Ithaca-based company Seaboard, which allows students to click through the dining hall menus on their college's website and learn the preparation method, ingredients, nutrients, and health information for every dish served. For example, a student at the University of Southern California using the website one day this month could have chosen among Thai beef salad, 144 calories, 4.2 grams of fat, vegetarian sloppy joes, 362 calories, 5.1 grams of fat, and Japanese spinach, 47 calories, 1.9 grams of fat, or opted for classic American favorites like cheeseburgers, 436 calories, 35.8 grams of fat, and pepperoni pizza, 241 calories, 18 grams of fat, to name a few dishes. USC has even set up kiosks in one of its dining halls to allow students to check the website with their dinner trays in hand, and other colleges are installing similar kiosks. Even at USC, however, pizza is still the most popular item, says Michael P. Gratz, the Director of Hospitality Services. He says burgers and fries are being consumed as much as ever. More variety. It's not that students lack food options. The university's 29 dining halls boast condiment bars with kimchi and 4 different types of mayonnaise. Ethnic foods and ingredients are also increasingly popular, says Haddon Raines, Vice President of Healthcare and Education for U.S. Food Service Incorporated, a food distributor based in Columbia, Maryland. Students have grown up eating a wider array of foods, and it's no longer uncommon for sushi to be in dining halls. Fries and a Coke. Still, the 3 items that top U.S. Food Service's list of most frequently ordered foods are chicken tenders, French fries, and carbonated beverages. Some days I feel like I'm banging my head against a wall, says Ms. Lee Cadwell of Concordia, which is also setting up electronic kiosks. The students talk out of both sides of their mouths. They say they want nutrition and variety, but then they gravitate to their familiar favorites, the pizza, the burgers, and the fried chicken strips. Or they take an opposite approach, nutrition experts say, and become so preoccupied with food that they barely eat anything. There definitely seems to be 2 extremes, says Stephanie Horvath, a senior at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. A lot of people eat the burgers and fries, and then there are people who grasp onto what they think is healthy and don't eat balanced meals. Ms. Horvath recalls that her 2 roommates freshman year would brag about how good they had been on a given day because they ate nothing but a piece of bread. Another friend ate only salads and couldn't figure out why she always had stomach aches and digestive problems, says Ms. Horvath. What Ms. Horvath and many college dietitians and nutritionists observe is part of a national trend. Although it is difficult to say what percentage of college students have eating disorders or struggle with obesity, many college nutritionists say they notice a growing number of students splitting into two camps of unhealthy eaters: overweight fast food junkies or obsessive dieters who either binge and purge or nearly starve themselves. It's sort of like everything else in our country, says Christine D. Economos, an assistant professor of nutrition at Tufts University, who specializes in the study of college students' eating habits. There's a public health crisis with obesity, and there's also more eating disorders, and in both cases, the underlying cause is the same in that it's emotional and started before they set foot on campus. Striving for moderation. The problems of compulsive overeating and undereating have the same underlying cause, health officials say. They both show an inability to eat in moderation. Consequently, experts like Rhonda Bokram, the staff nutritionist at the Student Health Center at Michigan State University, say the availability of nutritional information does little or nothing to influence students' eating habits. The students who should be paying attention to nutritional information are ignoring it, Ms. Bokram says, while the ones that pay attention care too much. I would do anything to get rid of things like kiosks, says Ms. Bokram. I have students say they won't eat foods that have a certain amount of fat grams in them, and that's just unhealthy. I think giving students that information sends the wrong message. It's important to teach people to eat without labels. Students tend to disagree. Lindsay McAdams, a senior at Meredith College in Raleigh, North Carolina, says that she wishes the dining halls at her college provided such information. If it had been available, she adds, it might have helped her make more informed eating decisions her freshman year, when she gained more than 30 pounds. And Ms. Horvath at Chapel Hill points out that such information is no different from labels on foods in the supermarket. If they're going to make it mandatory for you to be on meal plan, they have an obligation to tell you what's in the food they're serving, she says. Meanwhile, college nutritionists and dietitians will continue to emphasize moderation as a key to healthy eating, both at college and beyond. As Nancy Elson, a nutritionist at William Patterson University in Wayne, New Jersey, puts it, it's easy to give the students nutritional information, but it's hard to impart to them the understanding that food is the one thing they have to make peace with in their lives. Unlike other things they may develop addictions to, food is the one thing they can't give up for the rest of their lives.
Chapter 8. Why I Quit the Company by Tomoyuki Iwashita from New Internationalist.
When I tell people that I quit working for the company after only a year, most of them think I'm crazy. They can't understand why I would want to give up a prestigious and secure job. But I think I'd have been crazy to stay, and I'll try to explain why. I started working for the company immediately after graduating from university. It's a big, well-known trading company with about 6,000 employees all over the world. There's a lot of competition to get into this and other similar companies, which promise young people a wealthy and successful future. I was set on course to be a Japanese yuppie. I'd been used to living independently as a student, looking after myself and organizing my own schedule. As soon as I started working, all of that changed. I was given a room in the company dormitory, which is like a fancy hotel, with a 24-hour hot bath service and all meals laid on. Most single company employees live in a dormitory like this, and many married employees live in company apartments. The dorm system is actually a great help because living in Tokyo costs more than young people can afford, but I found it stifling. My life rapidly became reduced to a shuttle between the dorm and the office. The working day is officially 8 hours, but you can never leave the office on time. I used to work from 9 in the morning until 8 or 9 at night, and often until midnight. Drinking with colleagues after work is part of the job. You can't say no. The company building contained cafeterias, shops, a bank, a post office, a doctor's office, a barber's. I never needed to leave the building. Working, drinking, sleeping, and standing on a horribly crowded commuter train for an hour and a half each way. This was my life. I spent all my time with the same colleagues. When I wasn't involved in entertaining clients on the weekend, I was expected to play golf with my colleagues. I soon lost sight of the world outside the company. This isolation is part of the brainwashing process. A personnel manager said, "We want excellent students who are active, clever, and tough. 3 months is enough to train them to be devoted businessmen." I would hear my colleagues saying, "I'm not making any profit for the company, so I'm not contributing." Very few employees claim all the overtime pay due to them. Keeping an employee costs the company 50 million yen, $600,000 a year, or so the company claims. Many employees put the company's profits before their own mental and physical well-being. Overtiredness and overwork leave you little energy to analyze or criticize your situation. There are shops full of health drinks, cocktails of caffeine and other drugs, which will keep you going even when you're exhausted. Karoshi, death from overwork, is increasingly common and is always being discussed in the newspapers. I myself collapsed from working too hard. My boss told me, "You should control your health. It's your own fault if you get sick." There is no paid sick leave. I used up half of my 14 days annual leave because of sickness. We had a labor union, but it seemed to have an odd relationship with the management. A couple of times a year, I was told to go home at 5 o'clock. The union representatives were coming around to investigate working hours. Everyone knew in advance. If it was discovered that we were all working overtime in excess of 50 hours a month, our boss might have had some problem being promoted, and our prospects would have been affected. So we all pretended to work normal hours that day. The company also controls its employees' private lives. Many company employees under 30 are single. They are expected to devote all their time to the company and become good workers. They don't have time to find a girlfriend. The company offers scholarships to the most promising young employees to enable them to study abroad for a year or two. But unmarried people who are on these courses are not allowed to get married until they have completed the course. Married employees who are sent to train abroad have to leave their families in Japan for the first year. In fact, the quality of married life is often determined by the husband's work. Men who have just gotten married try to go home early for a while, but soon have to revert to the norm of late-night work. They have little time to spend with their wives, and even on the weekend are expected to play golf with colleagues. Fathers cannot find time to communicate with their children, and child rearing is largely left to mothers. Married men posted abroad will often leave their family behind in Japan. They fear that their children will fall behind in the fiercely competitive Japanese education system. Why do people put up with this? They believe this to be a normal working life or just cannot see an alternative. Many think that such personal sacrifices are necessary to keep Japan economically successful. Perhaps, saddest of all, Japan's education and socialization processes do not equip people with the intellectual and spiritual resources to question and challenge the status quo. They stamp out even the desire for a different kind of life. However, There are some signs that things are changing. Although many new employees in my company were quickly brainwashed, many others, like myself, complained about life in the company and seriously considered leaving. But most of them were already in fetters of debt. Pleased with themselves for getting into the company and anticipating a life of executive luxury, these new employees throw their money around. Every night they are out drinking. They buy smart clothes and take a taxi back to the dormitory after the last train has gone. They start borrowing money from the bank, and soon they have a debt growing like a snowball rolling down a slope. The banks demand no security for loans. It's enough to be working for a well-known company. Some borrow as much as a year's salary in the first few months. They can't leave the company while they have such debts to pay off. I was one of the few people in my intake of employees who didn't get into debt. I left the company dormitory after 3 months to share an apartment with a friend. I left the company exactly 1 year after I entered it. It took me a while to find a new job, but I'm working as a journalist now. My life is still busy, but it's a lot better than it was. I'm lucky because nearly all big Japanese companies are like the one I worked for, and conditions in many small companies are even worse. It's not easy to opt out of a lifestyle that is generally considered to be prestigious and desirable, but more and more young people in Japan are thinking about doing it. You have to give up a lot of superficially attractive material benefits in order to preserve the quality of your life and your sanity. I don't think I was crazy to leave the company. I think I would have gone crazy if I'd stayed.
Chapter 9. East Meets West on Love's Risky Cyber Highway by Fred Weir. From the Christian Science Monitor.
Alevtina Ivanova and other Russian bachelorettes like her are looking for a few good men. Abroad. Unfortunately, in our collapsed economy, very few men are able to support a family properly, she says. Russian men lack confidence. They become fatalistic. They drink. They die young. It's not surprising that Russian women pin their hopes elsewhere. Ms. Ivanova, a veteran of half a dozen serious cyber relationships with European and American men, is among thousands of Russian women turning to the internet to meet Westerners. The potential suitors are equally frustrated with the dating prospects in their home countries. American women are too independent, too demanding, too critical, says Chris, a middle-aged U.S. businessman visiting Moscow to meet several very nice ladies he contacted over the web. The visitor, who asked that his last name not be used, cites a joke often repeated here. A Russian wife wants to keep house for you. An American wife wants to get rid of you and keep the house. Dozens of web-based agencies are busy playing matchmaker for fees paid by both the women, who send in their pictures and bios for posting on international websites, and the men, who can obtain contact information for the women who pique their interest. Though there are no firm statistics, it is estimated that between 4,000 and 6,000 women from the former USSR marry U.S. citizens each year. One agency currently lists 25,000 women from Russia and other former Soviet republics seeking Western mates. There are dozens more agencies, each offering thousands of would-be brides. Some agencies have branched into travel, translation, and other services to profit from what they say is an exploding traffic. While some describe these international e-introductions as offering matches made in heaven, others see nightmares in cyberspace. People bring their illusions as well as their dreams to this market, says Tatiana Gurko, head of the independent Center for Gender Studies in Moscow. Like any physical place, the internet has predators lurking about, and sometimes they may be hard to spot. Western men increasingly report being ripped off by wily Russian women who write sweet emails, send sexy digital photos, hit them up for cash, and then disappear. On the other side, tales filtering back to Russia of internet marriages gone sour, including the murder of a Russian email order bride in the U.S., have put women on their guard. But Ivanova, who now works as an advisor to TOEIC, a large Moscow matchmaking agency, says that although none of her cyber relationships have led to marriage, she has had no regrettable experiences. You can find out everything you need to know about a man in 5 emails, she says breezily. Men are fairly obvious. You just need to question them properly. To her, the requirements on both sides are clear. A woman need only be attractive and educated, but a man must have property, means, and a good job. Yelena Kronina, who plans to soon wed a wonderful Norwegian man she met via the internet, says her dream has come true. It's so hard to be a woman in Russia, Ms. Kronina sighs. But then you visit this beautiful, orderly, prosperous country and spend time with a man who treats you with kindness and respect. Why would anyone say no to that? The potential dangers of dabbling in cyber romance are dramatized in a film, Birthday Girl, in which Nicole Kidman plays a mail-order bride from Moscow who brings a gang of Russian mafia thugs crashing into the life of her English bank clerk beau. In real life, the sting is usually more mundane. An unsuspecting Western man falls in love after a few gushing email exchanges with a false identity posted on a website. Sometimes the photos are actually of a Russian actress or fashion model, and is persuaded to wire cash for a ticket to visit him, or to meet some personal emergency. A woman can string a man along, playing on his emotions and sympathy and, in doing so, trick him into giving her money or expensive items, says Paul O'Brien, a U.S. web designer who has temporarily given up his search for a Russian wife after being burned by 2 women who just wanted money from him. Mr. O'Brien says he resorted to the internet because of America's fast-paced, impersonal, and workaholic culture. A lot of guys I know work many hours and do not have time for a social life, he says. So it seems particularly appealing to them when these agencies offer to help them make contact with beautiful and single women, he says, but warns. Prospective suitors need to be very wary of the women out there who have no intention of developing a relationship with them. Russian women insist it is they who face the greatest hazards. Many have heard about Anastasia Solovyova, a Russian from the former Soviet Republic of Kyrgyzstan, who was murdered by her American husband. She had been his second mail-order bride. Experts say there are many more tales of miserable and sometimes tragic mismatches. You come to a strange country to meet a man you've only corresponded with by email, says Ivanova. There are issues of language, culture, and personal morality. It takes a lot of trust, and for some women, it goes badly wrong. While no one wants to go on the record criticizing love, some experts argue that the westward outflow of Russian women must be viewed as a baneful social indicator. Russia has become the world's leading exporter of wives, and this is a tremendously profitable business, says Ms. Gurko. It may be a real supply and demand situation, she says, but let's try to remember that this vast supply of terrific women is made up of individuals whose hopes have been crushed in Russia. It's so sad that, in order to seek a better life, a Russian woman has to leave.
Chapter 10. Don't Let Stereotypes Warp Your Judgment, by Robert Heilbronner, from Think magazine.
Is a girl called Gloria apt to be better looking than one called Bertha? Are criminals more likely to be dark than blonde? Can you tell a good deal about someone's personality from hearing his voice briefly over the phone? Can a person's nationality be pretty accurately guessed from his photograph? Does the fact that someone wears glasses imply that he's intelligent? The answer to all these questions is obviously no. Yet, from all the evidence at hand, most of us believe these things. Ask any college boy if he'd rather take his chances with a Gloria or a Bertha. Or ask a college girl if she'd rather blind date a Richard or a Cuthbert. In fact, you don't have to ask. College students in questionnaires have revealed that names conjure up the same images in their minds as they do in yours, and for as little reason. Look into the favorite suspects of persons who report suspicious characters, and you will find a large percentage of them to be swarthy or dark and foreign-looking. Despite the testimony of criminologists that criminals do not tend to be dark, foreign, or wild-eyed. Delve into the main asset of a telephone stock swindler, and you will find it to be a marvelously confidence-inspiring telephone personality. And whereas we all think we know what an Italian or a Swede looks like, it is the sad fact that when a group of Nebraska students sought to match faces and nationalities of 15 European countries, they were scored wrong in 93% of their identifications. Finally, for all the fact that horn-rimmed glasses have now become the standard television sign of an intellectual, optometrists know that the main thing that distinguishes people with glasses is just bad eyes. Stereotypes are a kind of gossip about the world, a gossip that makes us prejudge people before we ever lay eyes on them. Hence, it is not surprising that stereotypes have something to do with the dark world of prejudice. Explore most prejudices, note that the word means prejudgment, and you will find a cruel stereotype at the core of each one. Why is it that we stereotype the world in such irrational and harmful fashion? In part, we begin to typecast people in our childhood years. Early in life, as every parent whose child has watched a TV Western knows, we learn to spot the good guys from the bad guys. Some years ago, a social psychologist showed very clearly how powerful these stereotypes of childhood vision are. He secretly asked the most popular youngsters in an elementary school to make errors in their morning gym exercises. Afterward, he asked the class if anyone had noticed any mistakes during gym period. "Oh yes," said the children. But it was the unpopular members of the class, the bad guys, they remembered as being out of step. We not only grow up with standardized pictures forming inside of us, but as grown-ups, we are constantly having them thrust upon us. Some of them, like the half-joking, half-serious stereotypes of mothers-in-law, or country yokels, or psychiatrists, are dinned into us by the stock jokes we hear and repeat. In fact, without such stereotypes, there would be a lot fewer jokes. Still, other stereotypes are perpetuated by the advertisements we read, the movies we see, the books we read. And finally, we tend to stereotype because it helps us make sense out of a highly confusing world, a world which William James once described as one great, blooming, buzzing confusion. It is a curious fact that if we don't know what we are looking at, we are often quite literally unable to see what we are looking at. People who recover their sight after a lifetime of blindness actually cannot at first tell a triangle from a square. A visitor to a factory sees only noisy chaos where the superintendent sees a perfectly synchronized flow of work. As Walter Lippmann has said, for the most part we do not first see and then define. We define first and then we see. Stereotypes are one way in which we define the world in order to see it. They classify the infinite variety of human beings into a convenient handful of types toward whom we learn to act in stereotyped fashion. Life would be a wearing process if we had to start from scratch with each and every human contact. Stereotypes economize on our mental effort by covering up the blooming, buzzing confusion with big, recognizable cutouts. They save us the trouble of finding out what the world is like. They give it its accustomed look. Thus, the trouble is that stereotypes make us mentally lazy. As S.I. Hayakawa, the authority on semantics, has written, the danger of stereotypes lies not in their existence, but in the fact that they become for all people some of the time, and for some people all of the time, substitutes for observation. Hence, quite aside from the injustice which stereotypes do to others, they impoverish ourselves. A person who lumps the world into simple categories, who typecasts all labor leaders as racketeers, all businessmen as reactionaries, all Harvard men as snobs, and all Frenchmen as sexy, is in danger of becoming a stereotype himself. He loses his capacity to be himself, which is to say, to see the world in his own absolutely unique, inimitable, and independent fashion. Impoverishing as they are, stereotypes are not easy to get rid of. The world we typecast may be no better than a grade B movie, but at least we know what to expect of our stock characters. When we let them act for themselves in the strangely unpredictable way that people do act, who knows but that many of our fondest convictions will be proved wrong? Nor do we suddenly drop our standardized pictures for a blinding vision of the truth. Sharp swings of ideas about people often just substitute one stereotype for another. The true process of change is a slow one that adds bits and pieces of reality to the pictures in our heads until gradually they take on some of the blurriness of life itself. Can we speed the process along? Of course we can. First, we can become aware of the standardized pictures in our heads, in other people's heads, in the world around us. Second, we can become suspicious of all judgments that we allow exceptions to prove. There is no more chastening thought than that in the vast intellectual adventure of science, it takes but one tiny exception to topple a whole edifice of ideas. Third, we can learn to be wary of generalizations about people. As F. Scott Fitzgerald once wrote, begin with an individual, and before you know it, you have created a type. Begin with a type, and you find you have created nothing. Most of the time when we typecast the world, we are not in fact generalizing about people at all. We are only revealing the embarrassing facts about the pictures that hang in the gallery of stereotypes in our own heads.
Chapter 11. The Art of Reading by Lin Yu Tung from The Importance of Understanding.
Reading, or the enjoyment of books, has always been regarded among the charms of a cultured life, and is respected and envied by those who rarely give themselves that privilege. This is easy to understand when we compare the difference between the life of a man who does no reading and that of a man who does. The man who has not the habit of reading is imprisoned in his immediate world in respect to time and space. His life falls into a set routine. He is limited to contact and conversation with a few friends and acquaintances, and he sees only what happens in his immediate neighborhood. From this prison, there is no escape. But the moment he takes up a book, he immediately enters a different world. And if it is a good book, he is immediately put in touch with one of the best talkers of the world. This talker leads him on and carries him into a different country or a different age, or unburdens to him some of his personal regrets, or discusses with him some special line or aspect of life that the reader knows nothing about. An ancient author puts him in communion with a dead spirit of long ago, and as he reads along, he begins to imagine what that ancient author looked like and what type of person he was. Both Mencius and Sima Qian, China's greatest historian, have expressed the same idea. Now, to be able to live 2 hours out of 12 in a different world and take one's thoughts off the claims of the immediate present is, of course, a privilege to be envied by people shut up in their bodily prison. Such a change of environment is really similar to travel in its psychological effect. But there is more to it than this. The reader is always carried away into a world of thought and reflection. Even if it is a book about physical events, there is a difference between seeing such events in person or living through them and reading about them in books, for then the events always assume the quality of the spectacle and the reader becomes a detached spectator. The best reading is therefore that which leads us into this contemplative mood, and not that which is merely occupied with the report of events. The tremendous amount of time spent on newspapers I regard as not reading at all, for the average readers of papers are mainly concerned with getting reports about events and happenings without contemplative value. The best formula for the object of reading, in my opinion, was stated by Huang Shangku, a Sung poet and friend of Su Tung Po. He said, "A scholar who hasn't read anything for 3 days feels that his talk has no flavour, becomes insipid, and his own face becomes hateful to look at in the mirror." What he means, of course, is that reading gives a man a certain charm and flavour, which is the entire object of reading, and only reading with this object can be called an art. One doesn't read to improve one's mind, because when one begins to think of improving his mind, all the pleasure of reading is gone. He is the type of person who says to himself, "I must read Shakespeare, and I must read Sophocles, and I must read the entire 5-foot shelf of Dr. Eliot so I can become an educated man." I'm sure that man will never become educated. He will force himself one evening to read Shakespeare's Hamlet and come away, as if from a bad dream, with no greater benefit than that he is able to say that he had read Hamlet. Anyone who reads a book with a sense of obligation does not understand the art of reading. This type of reading with a business purpose is in no way different from a senator's reading up on files and reports before he makes a speech. It is asking for business advice and information and not reading at all. Reading for the cultivation of personal charm of appearance and flavour in a speech is, then, according to Huang, the only admissible kind of reading. This charm of appearance must evidently be interpreted as something other than physical beauty. What Huang means by hateful to look at is not physical ugliness. There are ugly faces that have a fascinating charm, and beautiful faces that are insipid to look at. I have among my Chinese friends one whose head is shaped like a bomb, and yet who is nevertheless always a pleasure to see. The most beautiful face among Western authors, so far as I have seen them in pictures, was that of G.K. Chesterton. There was such a diabolical conglomeration of moustache, glasses, fairly bushy eyebrows, and knitted lines where the eyebrows met. One felt there were a vast number of ideas playing about inside that forehead, ready at any time to burst out from those quizzically penetrating eyes. That is what Huang would call a beautiful face, a face not made up by powder and rouge, but by the sheer force of thinking. As for flavour of speech, it all depends on one's way of reading. Whether one has flavour or not in his talk depends on his method of reading. If a reader gets the flavour of books, he will show that flavour in his conversations. And if he has flavour in his conversations, he cannot help also having a flavour in his writing. Hence, I consider flavour or taste as the key to all reading. It necessarily follows that taste is selective and individual, like the taste for food. The most hygienic way of eating is, after all, eating what one likes, for then one is sure of his digestion. In reading, as in eating, what is one man's meat may be another's poison. A teacher cannot force his pupils to like what he likes in reading, and a parent cannot expect his children to have the same tastes as himself. There can be, therefore, no books that one absolutely must read, for our intellectual interests grow like a tree or flow like a river. So long as there is proper sap, the tree will grow anyway, and so long as there is fresh current from the spring, the water will flow. When water strikes a granite cliff, it just goes around it. When it finds itself in a pleasant low valley, it stops and meanders there a while. When it finds itself in a deep mountain pond, it is content to stay there. When it finds itself travelling over rapids, it hurries forward. Thus, without any effort or determined aim, it is sure of reaching the sea some day. I regard the discovery of one's favourite author as the most critical event in one's intellectual development. There is such a thing as the affinity of spirits, and among the authors of ancient and modern times, one must try to find an author whose spirit is akin with his own. Only in this way can one get any real good out of reading. One has to be independent and search out his masters. Who is one's favourite author? No one can tell, probably not even the man himself. It is like love at first sight. The reader cannot be told to love this one or that one, but when he has found the author he loves, he knows it himself by a kind of instinct. We have such famous cases of discoveries of authors. Scholars seem to have lived in different ages, separated by centuries, and yet their modes of thinking and feeling were so akin that their coming together across the pages of a book was like a person finding his own image. George Eliot described her first reading of Rousseau as an electric shock. Nietzsche felt the same thing about Schopenhauer, but Schopenhauer was a peevish master and Nietzsche was a violent-tempered pupil, and it was natural that the pupil later rebelled against the teacher. It is only this kind of reading, this discovery of one's favourite author, that will do one any good at all. Like a man falling in love with his sweetheart at first sight, everything is right. She is of the right height, has the right face, the right colour of hair, the right quality of voice, and the right way of speaking and smiling. This author is not something that a young man needs to be told about by his teacher. The author is just right for him. His style, his taste, his point of view, his mode of thinking are all right. And then the reader proceeds to devour every word and every line that the author writes. And because there is a spiritual affinity, he absorbs and readily digests everything. The author has cast a spell over him, and he is glad to be under the spell, and in time his own voice and manner and way of smiling and way of talking become like the author's own. Thus, he truly steeps himself in his literary lover and derives from these books sustenance for his soul. After a few years, the spell is over, and he grows a little tired of this lover and seeks for new literary lovers. And after he has had 3 or 4 lovers and completely eaten them up, he emerges as an author himself. There are many readers who never fall in love, like many young men and women who flirt around and are incapable of forming a deep attachment to a particular person. They can read any and all authors, and they never amount to anything. Such a conception of the art of reading completely precludes the idea of reading as a duty or as an obligation. In China, one often encourages students to study bitterly. There was a famous scholar who studied bitterly and who stuck an awl in his calf when he fell asleep while studying at night. There was another scholar who had a maid stand by his side as he was studying at night to wake him up every time he fell asleep. This was nonsensical. If one has a book lying before him and falls asleep while some wise ancient author is talking to him, he should just go to bed. No amount of sticking an awl in his calf or of shaking him up by a maid will do him any good. Such a man has lost all sense of pleasure of reading. Scholars who are worth anything at all never know what is called a hard grind or what bitter study means. They merely love books and read on because they cannot help themselves. What, then, is the true art of reading? The simple answer is to just take up a book and read when the mood comes. To be thoroughly enjoyed, reading must be entirely spontaneous.
Chapter 12 When E.T. Calls by Seth Shostak from Sharing the Universe.
If it happens, it will begin slowly and without warning in a radio telescope's cramped, cluttered control room. Here, under 100 tons of steel, faced off against the pinpoint gleams of the night sky, a back-burner experiment could change the world. We can imagine this future drama. The protagonist is a lone astronomer, one of the 24 or so who have gambled their careers on SETI. For weeks, she has been spending long nights seated in front of a bank of computer displays, nursing a cup of coffee, and intermittently scribbling routine entries into a logbook. On the screens, blocks of slowly changing text monitor the electronics that are sifting through the thick cosmic static collected by the telescope. She sips at her drink and scans the display's laconic reports. There is no theatrical music, no high-tech sound effects, only the constant drone of fans in the electronics racks and the faint, distant grind of the telescope's tracking motor. This is not SETI as depicted by Hollywood. No control room loudspeaker will suddenly break into a squeal or a rhythmic boom. There was a time, many years earlier, when listening for audible signals was practical. But modern SETI experiments monitor tens of millions of channels simultaneously. Computers do the listening. With only a soft beep as herald, the computers have found that one channel in this multitude bears the hallmarks of extraterrestrial origin. On the screen, a single line of text tells the tale. A string of numbers giving the signal strength and exact frequency, terminated by the cryptic words, confirmed by FUD. The FUD, or follow-up detection device, is a specialized piece of electronics that orchestrates a two-telescope procedure to confirm that a signal is coming from deep space. The astronomer, while taking note, is not excited. After all, the system finds such candidate signals 5 or 6 times a week. So far, all have been traced to some sort of satellite interference or other man-made source. None has been extraterrestrial. Without prompting, the observing software swings the telescope 2 degrees away from the targeted star system. 10 minutes go by while the receivers accumulate more data. The FUD then reports that the signal has disappeared, as would be expected if it came from the star itself. The astronomer pays close attention, but her blood pressure doesn't change. It's probably another satellite, briefly mimicking ET as it parades across the sky. The telescope slews back on target. Another 10 minutes drag by, and the FUD reports that the signal has returned. The astronomer puts her coffee down. Her eyes fix upon the display screen. The telescope begins its cycle of on-off observations anew, and the evidence that this signal is extraterrestrial persists. She is now the first witness to a staggering sequence of events, a sequence that has never before occurred. Within hours, she will call another radio observatory to enlist its help. A detection at a distant telescope by other people and other equipment will rule out fiendish interference, a bug in the system, or an ingenious college prank. Within a few days, the signal will have been confirmed beyond reasonable doubt. The drama begun by a computer's soft beep will have grown into a worldwide din. We will finally have observational proof that other thinking beings populate the galaxy. Society's reaction. If SETI scientists find a signal, some people will challenge the detection, claiming that it's a hoax. After all, there are several million people who still doubt astronauts ever walked on the moon. But the reality of the result will be firmly based. Unlike the incessant claims that UFOs are alien spacecraft, belief in a SETI success won't depend on anecdotal evidence or shaky amateur videos. Anyone with access to a suitable radio antenna would be able to confirm the signal for himself with his own equipment. There would be no doubt of its legitimacy, and a SETI discovery would immediately precipitate intense scientific inquiry. Every major telescope would be cranked in the direction of ET's signal in the hope of learning more. But would the discovery also provoke a dramatic response from society at large? Would there be panic, disbelief, a sudden eruption of brotherly love and international goodwill? Panic in the streets is unlikely. To be sure, Orson Welles' 1938 broadcast of the War of the Worlds did cause a certain amount of alarm, but it's far less threatening to read of a signal from a distant star system than to hear that aliens are afoot here on Earth. A better example of the immediate reaction to the news that aliens exist is the public's response to the August 1996 announcement by NASA scientists that fossilized Martian microbes had been chipped out of a meteorite. This was, after all, life in space, even if it was very small and long dead. It was later acclaimed as the biggest science news story of the year, and yet it hardly affected anyone's daily routine. The announcement generated 1 week of headlines, after which the discovery dropped off the public's radar screen. No matter how anemic the short-term reaction, most pundits assume that the long-term consequences of finding extraterrestrials will be profound. Alien message. Out of the inevitable chaos following a SETI discovery, the facts of the detection would soon emerge, at least for those who are interested in facts. In view of the known technological limitations of SETI experiments, one can dare to predict what we would learn in those first exciting days. To begin with, where is the signal coming from? This might sound as if the answer should be obvious, but it won't be. For SETI searches that scan the heavens, the astronomers who first tune in ET will only know that the signal originates from a particular patch of sky. Many star systems could be camped out in such a patch. Fortunately, uncertainty about the source of the signal could be quickly dispelled. Observations with a massively large instrument, such as the 1,000-foot Arecibo dish, could substantially narrow the piece of sky from which the transmission originates. A large constellation of telescopes, such as the Very Large Array in New Mexico, where Ellie Arroway first heard the aliens in the movie Contact, could zoom in more precisely on the spot where ET is broadcasting. So within weeks of the discovery, we would likely know a few astronomical facts about ET's home turf. But such information would be, at least in the public's mind, secondary. First and foremost, the world will hanker to know what the aliens have to say. After all, the phone has rung, so what's the message? Deciphering a message could take a long time. Indeed, it could take forever. As we've mentioned before, any signal we're likely to detect will come from a civilization that is enormously more advanced than we. The alien's message might be impossible to unravel. Imagine Aristotle's puzzlement if he were faced with the task of decoding a modern color television signal. And Aristotle was no dummy. In this case, or in the case that the signal turns out to be merely intercepted alien radar devoid of message, we still won't be left empty-handed. We will have proof, after all, of celestial company. We will know that intelligent beings exist. We just won't know much about their particulars. A more interesting scenario is that they might try to help us. A deliberate transmission might be for infant technologies such as our own. In that case, the alien senders might take pity on our cryptographers by sending simple directions for deciphering their broadcast, a kind of interspecies primer. Elementary mathematics is frequently suggested as a good first lesson. Indeed, the initial messages received in the movie amounted to a bit of boring algebra. On the other hand, E.T. may figure that anyone able to eavesdrop on his signals will probably have already taken algebra and send us pictures instead. Given enough time and patience on the part of our extraterrestrial tutors, there's no certain limit to what they could teach us. Consequently, if we can crack the code of an alien signal, with or without E.T.'s help, the impact on earthly society could be profound. We would be in touch with an ancient and sophisticated culture. We might skip eons of history and leap into what otherwise would be a far distant future. Some consequences of this sort of contact are obvious. We could bone up on physics, chemistry, and astronomy. The aliens might fill us in on how to get along. Perhaps they would even be considerate enough to divulge the cure for death. A good thing to know from the individual's point of view, although a real challenge for society. There would be cause for optimism on Earth, for if E.T.'s society could endure for countless centuries without self-destructing, then presumably ours can as well.